This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to um, welcome to the new minimum standards webinar, where we're going to talk about the new minimum standards that are coming out from New York State and how you can meet them. We'll go over some of the old ones as well. But my name is Casey Conlon. I'm the Library Sustainability Coordinator here at the Mid-Hudson Library System, and joining me today too to support me is Rebecca Smith-Aldrich, who you all probably know is the Executive Director of the Mid-Hudson Library System. So we can ask, as I was just saying a minute ago, this is being recorded in case folks can't make it today. We had a couple more people signed up than are with us today, and some people that I know couldn't make it. If you have a question that you think is very sensitive, there's no need to ask it publicly here. You can always contact me and Rebecca outside of a webinar, and we're happy to answer any of those questions that you might have. So today we're going to go over the new standards. There are some brand new ones that have never been asked of us before, and there are many updates to the older standards that we have. There are only a few that are not updated in any way, but we're going to go over all the standards, so it'll be a little bit of a primer in case you're a little rusty on the old minimum standards, and you'll also be versed in the new ones when we get done with this. So we'll go over the standards, what they say, and how you can actually meet those standards, how we see some libraries meeting those standards, and common ways that people might not know that they can. And we'll also review some resources that you can look to for more info about meeting the standards. But first, I just wanted to do a little kind of fun kind of thing to see how much or how comfortable people feel with the minimum standards. So if you haven't taken your phone out already, or if you have, then maybe pop off Facebook for a minute and go to menti.com in your web browser. And we have this little poll that you can fill out. So when you go there, it'll ask you for a code, and the code that you put in is 6352611. And there should be a little quiz on there, and it'll ask you how well you know the minimum standards. Okay. Oh, I like that number one there. All right. So we have some people just tick the boxes on the report. Some people are pretty sure they're okay. And some people recognize them as the cornerstones of good library service. And some people say, hey, they're just an easy A. And everybody is willing so far to admit how they feel about the minimum standards. I'll admit that, if everybody had gone with the easy A one, maybe we could have packed this in and went home early. That would have been fun. But it sounds like we can all do with a little refresher for what goes into the minimum standards and where they come from and how we can actually meet them. So, all right, so a lot of people are pretty sure they're okay. And I think that you're probably right. The Mid-Hudson Library System, we have a lot of libraries who are doing a lot of really good work and who are really ahead of the curve, I think, in terms of library service in New York State and probably in the nation. But there's always a little bit more to learn, and that's probably why we are doing so well, is that we do have people who are committed to learning more and who are pushing the boundaries and always finding ways to serve their communities better. So thank you everybody for participating in this. I hope it was a fun little icebreaker for you all. I appreciate it, honestly. So we'll go back to our presentation. And it looks like we're back on that slide. So we'll move on and we'll talk a little bit about where these standards come from, just a little bit. So in education law, section 254, it actually says that the regions shall have the power to fix standards of library service for every association, public, hospital library, and other libraries in the state that receive any money from the state or from money levied on behalf or money levied by their district. And so if you are any of these libraries, these standards apply to you. And that's according to education law, section 254. So in the New York State codes and rules and regulations, they go a little bit deeper, and they say that the Division of Library Development, DLD, shall determine whether libraries are meeting the standards, and they do that through the annual report. And that's why on the annual report, you actually have to tick this box, and your board has to attest to the fact that all of the information that you provide in the annual report is accurate, because you're saying in the annual report that you meet the minimum standards, which some of us know really well and some of us are pretty sure we have a good handle on. So the other thing that this says, much like the first education law item, is it says that if you don't meet the minimum standards, then you cannot collect money, or you risk having your registration suspended or rescinded, and you will not be able to collect money to operate your library. The last piece is the New York Codes and Regulations 90.2, and that is essentially where the actual standards, the minimum standards that we're going to talk about, are laid out. So it's very important that we meet these, just because this is the basis for us getting our funding for our libraries. So some of that stuff is pretty scary. You can imagine you forgot to send out the community report one year, or if the director before you didn't send it out, maybe your library doesn't get any money that year. That could be a pretty scary situation. More often, the library finds that something was overlooked one year, or it wasn't done, as I said, by a previous director who maybe wasn't aware of it. And so this is usually what happens when standards are missed. We go through the annual report, or the library completes the annual report, and they determine that they have not met one of the minimum standards. So they mark that in the annual report, and they request a variance. And so the library will write up a plan of how they will bring themselves into compliance with the minimum standard that they missed, and they will submit that to Rebecca and I, and then that will go to the Mid-Hudson Library System Board of Trustees. And so they will look at the plan, and then they will approve the plan, and the library will enact the plan, and they will have met that minimum standard for that year. And it's a pretty, the plans aren't particularly elaborate. They're usually not that difficult. And it's usually just a, oh shoot, we forgot, or oh, I didn't know this was supposed to happen. And so it's kind of like, all right, let's make sure we straighten it out for next year and don't do it again, right? So I just wanted to make this clear too, in case, all that stuff that we were talking about a minute ago seemed especially scary. There are easy ways to bring the library back into compliance with the minimum standards. So the next idea is kind of, why are we changing them? Why are we changing the minimum standards? So there's some funny things on the old minimum standards that are really handy for when Rebecca and I do trustee essentials, because we know we can always get a laugh when we tell people that one of the minimum standards of the library is to have a telefacsimile machine or a microcomputer terminal with printer. Those are some pretty outdated terms, and they reflect the fact that the minimum standards haven't been updated in almost 20 years. So this is a pretty significant update that we're putting in place here, or that the DLD has put in place here, to make sure that libraries are actually bringing library services that are relevant to their communities in 2021. And we know that in 2021, good libraries are going to be in touch with their communities, and they're going to be out in their communities. Insofar as it's safe, given what's going on with COVID-19, but libraries aren't just providing a fax and a microcomputer anymore. There's a lot more that we have to do, and our communities still deserve a lot more. Again, this goes back to, these folks are paying for library services, and they want to make, you want to make sure that you're providing them with services that are actually going to benefit their community, and services that are relevant to them every day. And somebody popped something here in the chat about faxes, and I'm not actually poo-pooing faxes, because faxes are actually a big deal, and for people who need to send them, it's a really important thing that you're able to do. But there are other services that we can provide that are not necessarily more important, but there are other services that need to be provided as well. And so a lot of the minimum standards that we have in the coming year are going to address some of those things. So some of these might be familiar, and as we said, some of them are brand new. Some of them got updates, and some of them are staying the same. It's a little daunting when we look at them all, but as I said, a lot of our Mid-Hudson Library System libraries are already pretty far ahead of the curve on these, because y'all have been doing a lot of great work for a long time. And so you're not going to find it a huge leap to try to get to meet some of these standards and the updates. So we're going to go over them all. This is where they are. We have 14 of them, and we must meet them, and they are effective January 1st, 2021. So what does that actually mean for you at the library? So beginning January 1st, 2021, these will be the standards that are in place. So next year, in 2021 on the annual report, you will actually be reporting on 2020, right? So you're still held to the old standards for the report that you're going to fill out in February or January of 2021. In 2022, however, you will have to meet these standards, and some of these might take more legwork than just a couple of months. So you might need an entire year or over an entire year, as we have right now, to actually bring yourself into line with these. And it's better to have more time than less. So if there are any of these as we go over them that you think might be a problem for you, definitely reach out to me or Rebecca, or start planning now how you're going to bring yourself into alignment. So that is when the chickens come home to roost, is in 2022. So in January or February, when you're doing that minimum standards check boxes on the annual report, that's when you may be requesting variances because you are not able to meet the new standards that are in place. So we're going to start looking at the standards. We have the first standard, and they're numbered. The first one is bylaws. And so there are two significant updates to point out in the bylaws area. So the first update is that the bylaws must define the structure and governing functions of the library board of trustees. And they shall be reviewed and reapproved every 5 years at least, or more often if required by law. So previously, the minimum standard had just called for the responsibilities and procedures of the library board of trustees being in there. So now we have that the actual structure and governing functions are going to be in the bylaws of the board of trustees. An important distinction to make, we often have questions about charters and bylaws. This is a charter document. Some charter documents are a little bit newer, but this is a charter document, and it's a lot of times it's typewritten, and even there's handwritten things on there sometimes. And we go back to look at these because these are actually these are more powerful than your bylaws, and your bylaws cannot contradict your library charter. The same goes for your legislation if you're a special district library. So that's one thing that we want to point out, is your bylaws are set by the Board of Trustees, and these are the rules that are put in place for how the library is governed. Your legislation, if you're a special district library, or your charter, is set by the Board of Regents. And if you want to change that, that is not something that you can do as a library board. You can't simply have a vote on that. You have to actually, appeal to the Board of Regents, and you'll have to contact Rebecca and me, and you'll have to go through us, and then you have to pay some money, and then you can change these things. Sometimes you need to amend your charter, but it's not that often, and you cannot have rules in your bylaws that go against your charter. One instance would be if you wanted to change the number of trustees that you had. If your charter says how many trustees that you have in it, if it is a set number, then you must use that number or amend your charter to change the number of trustees that you have. You can't simply change it in your bylaws. Another note about the number of trustees that you have is many of our libraries have a range of trustees, and that comes from the charter document. It says it'll have 5 to 25 trustees or 7 to 15 trustees. And so in that case, the library can, or the library board of trustees can, through a vote by the board of trustees, according to the bylaws, amend how many trustees there are on the library board. And that is something actually that you should try to set each year as part of your annual meeting. If you have an annual meeting of the board and you have a range of trustees, it is a good idea to get in the habit of setting the number of trustees that you will have for the coming year each year. So other recommendations, this comes right from the trustee handbook. If you're looking for more info on what ought to be in your bylaws, these are the recommendations. The frequency of the library board of trustees meetings, officers that you have and the roles of the officers and the duties of the officers, the fiscal year that the library will operate on, and any standing committees that are there or how ad hoc committees are formed. And of particular, it's something that's good to put in that nobody likes to think about is what to do with, I tried to politely put on here, errant trustees, trustees who simply don't show up to meetings. We all know if somebody doesn't show up to 3 meetings in a row without an excuse, then they can actually be removed from the board. Excuse is the operative term here, and the library board of trustees can decide what is actually an excuse. But you might also put something in place for if somebody isn't getting along well with the board and isn't following what the board is trying to do and is causing problems on the board. A lot of the bylaws do not have anything like that. Likewise, having something in here about how you're actually going to fill vacancies that occur on the board. Rebecca, is there anything that you wanted to add for bylaws or anything that you think libraries ought to be including more often?
I think you did a great job here, Casey. I think there's sample bylaws in the trustee handbook that if you wanted just something to measure your current bylaws against, it's an easy place to start. And I would just, again, drive home the point that Casey made about if you have a range of trustees in your charter, make sure you're annually confirming that number. It makes your life a lot easier on the annual report to the state.
All right, thank you. Okay, so number 2, and number 2 with a bullet, I think. This is a big one here. You're gonna see this long-range plan come up a bunch of times now that we have new standards in effect. The library, the updates to this one are significant in that you must now have a community-based long-range plan that is developed by the Board of Trustees and the staff. Previously, the long-range plan was only required to be created by the Board of Trustees, and it did not necessitate, according to the minimum standards, community input. So this is a pretty significant change, and I think we all know a change for the better. It is more work, of course, to find out what the community actually needs, but when you're building library services on what you know and what you hear from people that they actually need in their community or from their library, you're going to have a much better long-range plan that's going to result in much more relevant and much better library services to your community. So some quick tips on this. How long should it be? You can have it be 3 to 5 years. That's a good number to try to get to, 3 to 5 years. There's no sense going out much further than 5 years, and much shorter than that wouldn't be too useful. In the long range plan, it's recommended that you have the library's mission, some goals that the library is trying to achieve, objectives and activities that are going to help you achieve those objectives, and then an evaluation mechanism to see if you've reached those objectives. So thinking about how you evaluate your services. So the activities are things that you're going to do. You're going to have a program, right? What is the goal of the program? Are you trying to involve more people in the library? Are you trying to help people, expand their horizons culturally and learn new things? And then how are you going to evaluate that? Are you going to evaluate it based on the number of people who come to programs, or are you going to evaluate it using something from Project Outcome that tells you what people actually got from the programs? So keeping this in mind when you're drawing up your long-range plan, that you want to actually be able to evaluate what's going on in the plan, and this is going to come up later as well. The long-range plan will also help you allocate resources because you've written out what you actually plan to do and what you're trying to do and where you're trying to get to. So then you can decide how you're going to allocate the limited resources that we all work with, whether it's staff or money. The other thing that I just wanted to mention, we've had some libraries who've gone through the Turning Outward program. This is a really great way to get community input from people, where you went out into the community and you talked to people, where you brought people into the library and you said, what kind of community do you want to live in? And people would tell you, and then you would hear, what they want from their community, and you would build library services around that. We're currently looking to see if there's a way that we can safely and effectively do this when we're not actually supposed to be gathering indoors with people, less than 6 feet apart. So, look out for more info on that. All right, so the next item is the annual report to the community. So a lot of us have done these before, and I think a lot of us, I don't know, maybe it's just me. I enjoy doing the annual report to the community. It's a nice chance to brag about the things that the libraries are doing, that the library has done over the course of the year. And it's just fun to put together fun graphical things that make people excited and to talk about how great the library is. So the difference this year is that it must be board approved So when you're doing your annual report this year, make sure you run it by your board so that they can formally approve it. And the other aspect is that it is a written report. Previously, it was not required to be a written report, and so that is a change this year. Many libraries have done it before as a written report, so this won't be a huge change for them. But it should also be based on, there's that word again, that long-range plan. And so, looking at what you're going to include in your annual report to the community. What goals and objectives have you reached over the course of the year? That should come out of your long-range plan. Were you able to do what you said you were going to do? Were you able to get more people in? Were you able to increase circulation or get more books that you wanted people to have access to? Any other significant accomplishments that you think are cool, make sure you have a camera handy to take pictures of all the great things that are going on in the library throughout the year. Gathering those stories from real people of what the library has actually done for somebody. That's going to make a really concrete and empathetic story if you see, an actual real story from a real human being. And if somebody, one of your stakeholders, whether they come to the library or not, can read that story, that will influence them. And, this is an advocacy tool, right? Because they're reading about the great program that you had for these kids and the great response that these children and families have from this program. Even if they're not coming to story time, they're still going to feel good about, the money that they're paying towards the library and, the things that you're doing for their community. Of course, statistics, but again, making sure that the statistics are concrete. So putting them into an infographic makes them a lot more engaging. We see a lot of libraries do a lot of cool infographics. And ROI, which stands for return on investment. A return on investment is a way to take the statistics, how many books circulated, how many kids came to programs, and see what the actual cost benefit is of that. What would your community have to pay to get those kinds of services somewhere else? Photos, of course, everybody loves pictures of people having a good time, especially children. Make sure you get those photo releases signed. This is a good place for thank yous as well. If you have any thank yous for legislators who provided you with funding or local organizations or businesses who helped you out, make sure that's part of the annual report to the community. Send these by mail if you can, put them out electronically on your social media, and maybe take the annual report as an opportunity to visit the different local meetings and tell people about how awesome their library is and all the awesome things that the library did. I'm sure you've racked up a ton of awesome things over the course of the year. And even if they're similar to the awesome things you did the year before, people are still going to be pretty excited to hear them. So, taking the time and, thinking about this annual report to the community as an advocacy tool and bringing it, using it, leveraging it as much as you can. Okay. All right, number 4, we have board approved written policies. There is no real significant update to this beyond the fact that the Board of Trustees must review the board policies every 5 years. So I think that this makes sense to everybody, right? We're not going to let our policies sit around and get stale for 5 years. They probably won't be that effective. And the fact is that many laws come out pretty frequently now. New laws come out each year that the library must comply with. So this is one of the new minimum requirements.
Policies.
Policies.
Oops, sorry.
Go on, please. Yeah.
No, please finish, and I just have a tip at the end.
No, I was just going to say policies give library staff the info that they need to do their jobs. That's the board sets the policy and the library staff carries it out.
I'm just going to say that this is one that I think that we all mean well on, but is hard to maybe keep up with. So I just wanted to point out, and I'll put in the chat box in just a minute, there's a tracking spreadsheet we built that matches the list of policies in the trustee handbook, which is what the state library looks for when they're registering a library to see if you've got a good solid set of policies. So the spreadsheet I'm about to put in the chat box for you has that tool that lines up with all the suggested essential policies that we audit for you every few years here at Mid-Hudson. And it's a way for you, I think, to figure out how you and your policy committee will start to track that 5-year window on things to make sure that they're in compliance, which I think is a big ask. So I think that tool will come in handy for you.
All right, thank you, Rebecca. Also of note, usually each year we'll do something called the Essential Documents Inventory, and usually we do it in June, and we ask you what library policies do you have? We want to know what you have, and we work to keep an updated list of all the policies that you have. This year, because of COVID-19 and the pandemic, we did not do that. So you may have missed that. We just wanted to give you a little bit of a break. But if you need help, prioritizing policies beyond the spreadsheet and the checklist Rebecca is able to provide, you can of course reach out to Rebecca or I, and we can help you prioritize those. Okay, another one, we need the budget. Previously, we were required to just present a budget, and what had worked previously for that was if you had just had a vote on the budget, that would actually work. And if you had just posted something to your website, that would work as well. But now the requirement is that you prepare and publish a board-approved budget. It previously wasn't required to be board-approved, which is kind of wild, but now it is actually in there in the minimum standards that the board must approve the budget. And the budget must meet community needs based on the long-range plan of service. So there's that word again. So here's some tips. So when you're preparing the budget, the Board of Trustees and the library director should be working together to prepare the budget. You should have the budget available in print and online. You should publish it to your website and keep it up to date. And you probably don't need a ton of copies of these, not as many as the new James Patterson book, but you're gonna want to have maybe one of these behind the desk in case somebody wants it. And so in this, we want to make sure that we're indicating that we're tying it to the long-range plan, so that the budget is tied to the goals and the objectives that you're looking for, usually the next fiscal year. Rebecca, was there anything else you wanted to add about the budget?
No, just I would say that in the past, the current minimum standards, you can meet this standard if your budget goes up for a public vote. So I think the main difference here is that we just want to make sure it gets on the website at some point. I think that's the biggest difference here.
Okay, great. So Jessica's asking what publish means. So I think it means get it up on the website, and then to also have a print copy if somebody comes in and asks for a copy of it.
Yeah, Jessica, published definitely. And I'll just share that I co-chaired the committee that redid these standards at the first go around. And the intent behind publish was to see more information on libraries' websites.
So indicate resources needed. So that's if you can tie the budget back to your goals that come from your long range plan, then you can use the budget as a kind of advocacy tool, right? This is what this money is for. All right, so number 6, this one has an update, evaluates the effectiveness. So previously we were evaluating the effectiveness of the library's collection, and now we will be evaluating the effectiveness of programs and collections, and of course, according to the long-range plan. What are we trying to do with our programs and services and our collection? That's what we're going to define in our long-range plan. And then we're going to actually evaluate them. And as we said earlier, the long-range plan should actually have how you plan to evaluate these in the long-range plan. So there's lots of different ways that you can measure things. There's qualitative and quantitative measures. Qualitative is stuff like surveys and focus groups. Again, project outcome is the program having the intended effect. Are people learning about the services at the library? Are their children stronger readers or more confident readers when they get done with the program or as a result of the program? You could also do focus groups where you talk to folks and hear from them about what they're doing in the library, and you want to affect a change through that. Are people going to say that they find the services to be helpful and that they like to use them and that they like them? The other thing that we have is good old-fashioned statistics, right? Stuff we can pull out of the databases, stuff we can count when people come in, and we can see if the needle moves in any of those areas. So being a little bit more deliberate about the things that we're doing in the library and seeing if they're having the effect that we want, and not simply doing them because we've always done them, right? So number 7 is scheduled hours, and there are no updates to this one, but it's worth noting that regular hours actually give people a fighting chance at coming into the library and making use of the services that you have in the library. I think this isn't a problem for a lot of our libraries, but just keeping in mind that you want to have hours that reflect, meeting the needs of people in the community. And we have many people who have different things, different schedules and different priorities in the community. So, do you have some hours on the weekend for people who work 9 to 5? Do you have some stuff 9 to 5 for people who work evenings? So making sure that you are not excluding anybody with the hours that you're working, that you're providing by the library. So Tammy is saying many of us won't meet this standard this year. And so we'll probably include a note on the annual report based on the fact that there was a pretty significant order from the governor to close our buildings and close our facilities.
In case I'll just add that on the calls to the Division of Library Development, they're obviously aware of this and understand it's a unique situation across the state. So I don't think we'll see libraries penalized for this. I think, but they will probably ask if you haven't achieved your getting back to the minimum weekly hours open by January, they are going to ask what your plan is to get there. So I think that'd be something to be prepared for.
Okay. Okay, so number 8 is maintains a facility that meets the community's need. Now it is updated to include that the community's need will be defined in the long-range plan, and that you will not only have to have a restroom, but it says right in the minimum standard that you will have to have a public restroom, and that you will also have to have power and data infrastructure to meet your community's needs. So this reflects, a logical evolution of this standard, that there are new things that we have to provide to folks, and something that we probably always should have provided is a public restroom. But the fact that we're looking at our community and developing that long-range plan and thinking about how our building serves our community and what their needs are. Power and data infrastructure is kind of an obvious one. That is developing, and something that we can think about as our buildings start to reopen. Are people going to be trying to work from our libraries, and do we have the network capacity to support people? Do we have enough outlets without running extension cords all over the floor for people to plug in their devices that they need to connect with work? So facility plan can be helpful in this. We have a facility plan template, which can be used as part of the long range plan, or it can actually be used separately, and it can be informed by the long range plan. Anytime we're talking about the facility, we want to make sure accessibility is a priority. So here we have a brand new one. This one is programming. And so now we have number 9. It says, library must provide programming to address community needs as outlined in the long range plan of service. So we're going to look at and talk to our community and see what they want from their community and see how the library can help them get there. A lot of the libraries that we did Turning Outward with last year, they heard from people that they wanted to feel more connected to their neighbors. And so they had a plan that included programs, and they would build into the programs also a way for people to be able to interact with each other after the programs. Obviously, some of that is on the back burner now as we're not allowed to gather, but still, I think it's important, the idea that even through Zoom, we're providing a way for people to connect to each other when they can't safely do it in person. So some tips: we want to establish goals for our programs and we want to evaluate them. And another little tip that comes out of our lab project that we did in 2019 is to make sure that you communicate with all staff about the programs that are going on so that they can actually have a chance at helping people find their way to the programs and recommend programs to people. It's hard for people to come to the programs if they don't know they're happening, and your frontline staff has a kind of opportunity to interact with them and maybe upsell them and let them know that these programs are happening.
Casey, if I could just add, I think this is an important moment when we see this added to the minimum standards. Before, there was no acknowledgement of a library's role in the community beyond basically lending books and getting more books into people's hands. So I think this is an important one because really you all meet this already. You're doing programming, no problem. I mean, making sure it ties into your long range plan, I'm sure most of you can do that already too. So I think the big news there is that the State Library and the Board of Regents is acknowledging that wider educational role we play in the community, which I think is a very good thing.
Thank you. All right, so number 10, we have provides equipment. And so the library, this one is actually updated. A lot of us, this is another one that we're not going to feel the pinch on too much. The library provides a circulation system that provides access to the library's catalog and other libraries' catalogs. For us, this is not going to be a difficult one because we all have Sierra, and Sierra links up all of our collections. This is something we've been doing for a long time, or many of our libraries have been doing for a pretty long time. The other thing that we need is the equipment and technology and connectivity to access information. So again, thinking about the hardware that we have in our building. Sierra is going to take care of the ILS part that it calls for, that's newly called for. But thinking about, whether you have the internet capacity and the speed that we talked about earlier. Some of our libraries have an actual gigabit connection, so that's 100 megabits per second that people can actually access information, upload and download. So the other time, the technology plan will actually provide some room for this too, where you're planning on how often you're going to be buying computers, and you can think about budgeting how frequently that you actually have to update your technological infrastructure, whether it's on a rolling basis, a couple of computers if you have a lot of them, or whether it's the whole hog every couple of years you want to take out all your computers and put in all new ones. There's benefits and drawbacks to both of those. So keeping an eye on the fact that we need to provide relevant equipment to help people access the things that they want to get to in the library. Library information, there's an update to this one. So now, previously you only had to provide information in print that included the hours, the borrowing services, location, and phone number of the library. But now you must provide access to current library information in print and online. And you must also include the library's bylaws, the long-range plan, the annual report to the community, the policies, and the budget. So these are items 1 through 5 that we talked about earlier in the minimum standards. And the idea here is to raise the level of transparency of the library so that people can know what's actually going on in the organization and more fully participate in the library organization and take advantage of the services that the library offers. So just some tips: post and update the information to the website. Maybe there's one page where you keep this info, or maybe there's a couple of pages, but make sure you keep in mind where they are and make sure you update it as it needs to be updated, especially with the policies if you're changing those out. Have print copies available of the relevant library information for people to access the library, and maybe just 1 or 2 copies of the bylaws and the budget and the long-range plan for the community, because you will not have as many takers of that. It's not necessary to produce that in great quantities. But thinking about the info that we're providing, the idea that you can distribute locally that library info that you're going to be providing. So think about this as another advocacy tool, right? Think about it as a kind of welcoming kind of brochure. And I know some of us have worked on these, and I know sometimes we like them and sometimes we don't, but really think about this as an advocacy tool or a sales pitch or a way to actually get people to use the services that are available to the libraries. I think that we have a lot of services that folks don't even realize. And so trying to make them accessible and using a tone that's welcoming in this document, and not all the things that you can't do in the library, but all the things that you can do with your library card. So this is a list of things that you ought to have in that kind of public-facing library brochure and on your library website. This might also be part of, it's not required, but if you have a welcome email for folks when they sign up for a library card, letting them know, how they can access the library. This is some basic information that they'll need to be able to use their library card. The other stuff, it seems like it divided pretty evenly between library information that you need to provide to folks, and then board and governance information that needed to be provided to folks. And so you want to make sure people know about the board meeting dates and times. I don't know if you've ever really wanted to go to a town board meeting or a meeting of some organization in town, and they simply just don't have it together enough to publish their information anywhere you can get it. That's not a great feeling. It doesn't inspire confidence in the organization. So just making sure that you're upfront about that, and how people can actually access your meetings and how people can go to your meetings. Likewise, making sure that the agenda is available online a week in advance, and if there's any special meetings, to make sure that those are available in advance, the topic and of content of that. And another thing that we tend to forget sometimes is that draft board meeting minutes should be published to the web within 2 weeks of the meeting. And they don't have to actually be approved, right? That would be hard to have a whole nother meeting just to approve the minutes. But draft copies of the board meeting minutes should be published to the web within 2 weeks of the meeting that you had. So we had a question about whether all the policies should be published to the website. Rebecca, do you know if all the policies are supposed to be published?
They don't require all of them because they're trying to leave wiggle room for libraries, because they know not every library is going to have every single policy on that list. Even in Mid-Hudson, where we have a huge head start on this issue compared to other systems, we only have 2 libraries out of 66 that have all of them. So when I'm about to post here the link to the kind of larger explanation of the standard that the state has published, you'll see that they're not super nitpicky about which policies. They certainly laid out things like an explanation of the library's borrowing rules, like who's eligible for a card, length of loan of library materials, policy on overdue items, fines, and fees. My recommendation would be to think about how we've divided that list of essential policies into what we call internal and external, that the external policies, the ones that are public facing, so that you could say patrons have had access to our patron code of conduct or our rules for the copy machine, that those types of policies are available on the website. I think the internal policies, like your business continuity plan or your audit review schedule, that stuff is less important to have on the site. So if you wanted to prioritize them, I'd focus on the ones that are public facing.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we have another one that has not been updated, and that is the requirements for a paid library director. But it's important to note that the salary, the hours, the benefits that a library director receives or works should be comparable with other positions in the area that require a similar amount of hours and a similar level of education. And also not included in here directly is the idea that the library director should be able to take advantage of continuing education as well as other staff, so that they can actually keep themselves informed about things that are going on in the library world. So this is a new one. This is number 13, and we have annual technology training for library staff. And so under this new standard, the library must provide library staff with annual tech training appropriate to their positions to address community needs. So, thinking about the things that we have in our building, we were talking about the technology plan and how we buy these computers. It's not an insignificant expense. We buy software, we buy different services. We have Canopy and Hoopla and Overdrive, Universal Class. And so we need staff to be trained at the level that makes sense for how much they're going to be interacting with these things, so that they can actually support the people who come in who want to access these things. Whether it's, whether their primary job is to, be able to help somebody just send some emails, or be able to, navigate a web browser to be able to download things and print things out. If that's the job that they have to do on a daily basis, they need to be able to do that. If you expect them to be able to assist people with creating a resume using the Microsoft Word software that you've purchased from TechSoup, then you need the staff to be able to be trained on that as well. And recognizing that things are changing every year, this should be an annual training that is repeated. Likewise, if you have a new service that comes in, whether it's Canopy or Hoopla, does the staff know how to navigate that well enough to be able to provide somebody with assistance if they get into a pinch over the phone? So some ways to accomplish this could be continuing education for a professional development day. If you have a professional development day and you want to focus part of it on technology training that's relevant to all the staff, then you can. Or if you want to break folks apart into other relevant pieces that they'll be working on, if you have staff who has very different duties from their other staff coworkers, you can do that. Likewise, at a staff meeting, if you want to talk a little bit about a new technology as an ongoing kind of thing, a little presentation to folks, that's a good way to do it. There are webinars and online courses that folks can take, as well as, of course, conferences, and the idea that you can build this into the technology plan that staff, and I think the sample plan from Mid-Hudson there, it actually says that library staff should receive some training in technology as it comes out, and you should schedule this. Rebecca, did you have any more information on this topic?
I would say that it was left very open so that you get to pick what training you feel your staff needs. It's not prescriptive at all. And I would hope that the offerings Mid-Hudson provides on a routine basis would help you meet this one with not too much effort.
Okay, great. So number 14, last one on the list, we have the library must establish and maintain partnerships with community organizations to enable the library to address the community's needs. So a lot of our libraries have a lot of partnerships, and I think we all know that partnerships can help us reach new people. It can help us reach people that are not library users now. It can also help us bring services and programs that we actually can't do. Maybe the partner organization is a business or organization who actually has expertise in this area, and so by partnering with them, you can actually bring them in, and they can help educate the community on this issue. It also helps to often lessen the work that we have to do. We don't have to be experts in every field or learn everything that we actually have to do. If we can bring in a local expert from a local organization to actually help us do the work and help us educate the folks and get them the kind of experiences that they want to have. So some possible partners that many of you are likely partnered with already: workforce development organizations, whether there's job training programs or resume review programs that come in or are done remotely. Head Start helps get kids ready for school if you're doing programs like that with that organization. The local school is always a great partner, usually working towards similar ends, so it's good to be able to work together on that. Local historical society, if it helps you, provide more information to folks in your community, or you can help them in some way. The Cornell Cooperative Extension, a lot of our libraries partner with them, and the Chamber of Commerce too, helping local businesses or helping businesses connect with people, or even just helping businesses meet the needs that they have. Those are some of the partnerships that you can create that would help meet this minimum standard. Rebecca, was there any other input on this one? For the partnerships, this is a brand new one.
It is a brand new one, and I think it ties back into that whole idea of being connected with the community and not being demonstrating that we're leveraging those partnerships. So again, it was one that when the state library assessed it, they felt most libraries already do this, so it shouldn't be a big lift for libraries. But I think it's a nice way, again, to promote the fact that libraries are connected in the community and part of the kind of ecosystem of education in each community. So hopefully it's not too onerous, but if you're having any trouble with it, just let us know, and we bet we can help you figure out how you're probably already doing this.
Yep. All right, so that is all the minimum standards. And you saw there was a lot of updates. We only got away with 2 of them that didn't have any updates. Many of them were updated for the long range plan. So, the idea that we're gonna be a little bit more strategic in the way that we meet these standards and a little bit more accountable for the way that we meet them. And a couple of them are brand new, but again, like we just talked about, these don't seem like, new things that Mid-Hudson Library System libraries are doing. These are things that we're doing now, so it shouldn't be too much of a reach. These are a couple of the resources that I think are particularly handy in trying to understand the new standards. The first one up here is a chart that compares the old standards with the new standards, so you can see how they're actually different. The second item there is the helpful information for meeting the minimum public library standards, and that is a website where you can click around and you can find links to more information about meeting the different standards, and they'll actually be more explained out for the different standards. And the third one is a PDF version with similar information if you wanted to hold something you could hold in your hand or read on your computer there. So those, in addition to some of the things that Rebecca had shared here, I think those are really good sources. If you want to dig in deeper on any one of these or all of these, then please go right ahead, and we'll send all these slides out so you'll have these links, and you'll have all the information that we had before. So we talked about all the standards. We went over them. We want to stop now and see if you had any questions specific to any of them. I know we've been doing some questions as they come in. People are welcome to unmute themselves. I'm going to pause the recording, and then we can do some questions.